Good evening and welcome to the latest episode of The Hard Live. For those of you who don't know, my name is Rich and I run and operate The Hard Compound, a one-stop shop for all things motorsport. And we are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube, so do search for The Hard Compound on any of those platforms and give us a follow so you don't miss out on all the good stuff that we try and bring you 2 or 3 or 4 times a day in the form of race reviews, race previews. We also do throwbacks, any breaking news, car and bike unveils with the liveries and all that kind of a thing, and anything else we can shake a stick at, really. And we cover everything from F1 to BTCC, World Touring Cars, NASCAR, IndyCar, rally bikes. Anything that's going on in the world, we try and cover it for you. So as I say, do come along and give us a follow. In case you hadn't noticed, we also do live interviews such as this one. These are broadcast on our Facebook, our Twitter and our YouTube channel, and they're automatically saved so you can watch them back at your leisure. We've had a variety of guests from across the motorsport spectrum, drivers from the past, drivers from the present, and some media folk as well. Just a few names, just to do a quick name drop. We've had the honour and the privilege of speaking with Mr. Mario Andretti and with Jackie Ickx. And we've spoken with many drivers from the world of touring cars and F1, sports car, IndyCar. Just recently, we've spoken with Mr. Mark Sura. We've spoken with Carl Wendlinger. We've spoken with Will Power, Alonso Jr. We spoke with Alex Caffey, with Perry McCarthy, Mark Blundell, Eddie Cheever, Mika Salo, Emanuele Perot, Carl Wendlinger, Derek Warwick, Stefan Johansson. We've spoken with Mr. Jason Plato. We've spoken with Dick Bennett, Alan Hyde, with Paul Page from the States. We've spoken with Mr. Gabriele Tarquini, Anthony Reid, Ivan Muller, Jason Plato. I think I said that before. Frank Sittner, Rob Gravitt, Andy Prio, just recently Fabrizio Giovanardi, many more. So do come along and join us for the future live interviews we have coming up. We've got Kenny Addison coming up on Tuesday, and do go and watch those videos at your leisure if you so wish. But do not do it just yet, because we have got another terrific live guest this evening. He's from the world of the motorsport media, broadcasting, journalism, commentary, etc., all that good stuff that we could not be without. Because if we just sat at home watching a screen, it would all be very dull, So, without any further ado, please join me in welcoming someone who has commentated on pretty much everything over the last 30 years and is currently the voice of the British Touring Car Championship. So we're going to bring him in right now. Please join me in extending a very warm welcome to Mr. David Addison.
Evening, Richard. Evening, everybody. You've thrown me under the bus there, haven't you? You've come up with a long list of star names, and then here's tonight's anticlimax, me. So thanks for that.
Well, we have to work up to the to the star attraction, don't we? We always we have to do it. No, there is absolutely no hierarchy here at all. But it's fantastic to have you on. Thank you so much for coming on and having apology battery. There we are. A bit of a freeze there. Right. Sorry, I think we had a bit of an audio issue there. We're okay. How's everything going?
It goes. It is a strange start to the season because it seems to be a very late start this year. So I'm kind of itching to get out there and do things. I have been to a couple of race meetings already, but British GT or SRO GT or British Touring Car seasons, which are the main 3 things that I tend to cover, don't really start until Easter, or in the case of touring cars, the other side of Easter. So, I know club racing is alive and well, and race meetings are happening, but I'm sort of drumming my fingers now, thinking, come on, when can we get out there? So, a couple of media days this week, Porsche at Silverstone, TCR I went and have a look at on Tuesday. And then the first race meeting for me is going to be Easter weekend. In terms of circuit racing, it'll be Upton Park British GT, and then it starts to get busier.
Excellent, good. That's when the handbrake can come off, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
It kind of feels like the handbrake's been on for months, doesn't it? But it was obviously great to be at TCR UK Media Day on Tuesday. It was good to bump into you there. So, I think we've both just about dried out, haven't we? It was a soggy one.
It was pretty miserable, and I mean, I know it was a test day more than a media day, but you couldn't really go and find anybody, could you? Because they were all sheltering from the rain and trying to keep warm. But you know, it was encouraging to see a decent grid and a championship that people had pretty much written off a few years ago has rallied strongly, and that looks like it's set for a pretty decent year.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like a strong grid. There's some great cars there. Some of the liveries are absolutely outstanding as well, which is obviously what we like to see. For those of you who did see, I had 3 hot laps in one of the cars, and they go like the clappers. Yeah, do tune into the TCR UK this year, alongside the BTCC and all the other things that David's covering, because it's going to be a cracking season. Very quickly before we go on, so I'll turn my attention to the comment section. Good evening, folks. We've got lots and lots of comments coming in. Kevin Whitewood has shared this to British Touring Car Chat. Thank you very much, Kevin. Diffan Evans, Katie, Stephen Sherwood, Jason Homshaw, all you guys, thank you for tuning in. John Cavill. If you have any questions or comments, do pop them in the comment section, and we will come to them as and when we can. But we have a lot to get through because you've had one heck of a career, David. But before we go on, I have been given something by Mark Wagstaff at BTCC Blueprint, and he's instructed me to put this on. So if you just
Slightly scared.
if you just bear with me, I'm just going to pop this over my head. We've got a T-shirt here with
fantastic!
A T-shirt with your catchphrase.
Fantastic! I want one.
So we can thank Mark Wagstaff for that at BTCC Blueprints. They do great work, and you said you'd like it. So this one is XL or XXL, and I'm not that, but anyway.
Right, where do I get one? Where do I sign up? Excellent, they're brilliant, Mark.
We're going to speak with Mark about that, see if he's got any spare. This might come off in a minute because I've got a lamp in front of me. It's quite warm. Anyway, so we've got that out the way. For those of you who have got audio and not sound, that says he's off like a stabbed rat on my T-shirt, which is of course David's awesome catchphrase, which is wonderful. Yes,
that's great.
We said we'd like that. I just got to wear it so it's not lopsided. There we go. Right. Anyway, that's enough messing around.
Good business.
Right, motorsport. That's why we're here. We love motorsport. Basically, if we can take it right back to the start. Where did your interest in the world of motorsport and in the world of the media first come from, and how did they come together?
The motorsport interest came thanks to a lady called Margaret Simpson, who is to this day chief marshal at Alton Park for pretty much every race meeting going.
Wow.
Margaret and her late husband David marshalled then. She still marshals now. Margaret's mother was a friend of my grandmother, and when I was 5, they said, you know, David clearly likes toy cars, you ought to take him to Alton Park for the day. End of 1977, tickets were provided. I went to Alton Park. It was the last meeting of the year, and I think I hated every minute of it because it was loud and it was you couldn't see the cars for much of the lap. I had this, to this day, I had this recollection of walking over what was then the old Eagle Star footbridge at Dearleet as a grid of special saloons left the line, and the noise made me cry. So now I'm in a position where my noise makes people cry instead. And so we drove home in silence, and parents knowingly looked at each other and thought, "Good, that's shut him up, that cured him." And after a few weeks, all the toy cars came out of the drawers, and my mother was horrified to find them lined up on the floor in a 3-2-3 grid formation, and you couldn't find the placemats because they were being used as curbs to go round to map out something like Alton Park. And it went from there. And I wanted to go back in the following year. And my father was I mean, there was no motor racing history in the family. My father was a Manchester United football fan, and he often would rather go and watch football than go to Alton Park. So my mum, who was a proper trooper, used to take me to Alton. And then I got friendly with a boy at school, and his dad had raced and then returned to racing, a chap called Robin Booth. And Robin used to take me and Charles, and then his son again developed a football passion rather than staying with motor racing. And that got me to about 16, 17. And by that stage, I'd had a weekend at this was the sort of tipping point. British Grand Prix 1984. Anybody that's very old can remember that on the Friday in practice, Johnny Cecotto had his big accident out at Westfield Dingle section.
Yes,
And there was a long delay. Brian Jones, who was the main circuit commentator at Brands, was having to fill, because this was long before you had radio, or it was just about coming, I think, around about that time, circuit radio. So Brian had to keep filling and filling and filling. And I was that smartass that was either correcting him or heckling or finishing the sentence. And my father said, "You should try this, or you should have a go at this." And I think it was one of those lines that was meant to be, "Will you please shut up?"
Almost a sarcastic thing.
Yeah. But I took it the other way and thought, actually, do you know what? I'd quite like to do that, because I didn't really have any great desire to race. I mean, I was probably 12 by this stage, but I thought, do you know what? You're probably quite warm in a commentary box. You probably get a good view. You don't have to pay to get in. Yeah, I quite like the idea of that. And that was the extent of my ambition. And so it went from there, really. And throughout going to race meetings as a teenager, as much part of the day was listening to the commentary as much as it was the racing. It's probably why I prefer radio to television when I come home. Some people arrive home and put the telly on. I always put the radio on, and
Right.
and voices and spoken word and things like that have always appealed. And so listening to commentators as I was growing up was as much part of the day out as watching the racing, really.
I think that's great, because to so many of us, it's all about, well, certainly to me, it was all about watching the cars going around and all that kind of a thing. And it wasn't until I was really much older that I really started paying attention to who was commentating and if there was a change in the voice and everything. So it's great that was in your mind almost, from a very early time in like motorsport. You said you didn't have any real desire to go racing. Was it just a case of it just wasn't really for you?
I don't know, really. I think I'd probably read enough editions of Autosport or Motoring News by that stage to keep reading about drivers that were struggling for a budget. And I thought, where do you get the money for it? I couldn't see myself even then as somebody knocking on doors, begging for money, effectively. And I'm full of admiration for drivers that season after season after season somehow manage to scrape together a budget to go and do whatever, whether it's stock car racing or international GT racing, whatever it might be. I just couldn't see myself being that person. So this has given me a way of enjoying my hobby, if you like, in a different way.
Yeah, and just without the stress of the financial side of it, and is it going to happen? Is it not? That kind of a thing. Because we see it quite often on social media. I'm just going to throw this in here. We see this quite a lot. Is so and so hasn't got a drive, and to go back like 2 years ago, it was like Dan Camish, for argument's sake, was out of a drive with Team Dynamics because Honda had pulled out and all that kind of thing. And someone said, "How has so and so got a drive when Dan Camish hasn't?" And to use that as an example, and the response is always, "Well, money. It's all about money these days. You don't need the these days on the end, do you? It's always been about money, hasn't it? Right since like things like F1, it was literally born on rich lads going racing, wasn't it?
Pretty much, yeah. And it will always be that way. I mean, a cost cap in Formula One is a very laudable idea, and it can kind of work up to a point. But there's, obviously, the more you've got, the more you can spend, the more the better things you can buy, even down at very grassroots level. And it is one of the few sports where there is always that element of it. That doesn't matter what your personal ability is like. There's always that extra factor of, you see it in Formula One now. Mercedes not having a great year, so that affects the results of the drivers. But equally, if you go to a team without the proper budget, you're never going to get as far as you should do.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, and there's the old line, isn't it? The talent can only get so far, and unfortunately, we've seen that with a lot of drivers in a number of series. So obviously, you didn't go down the driving route; you went down the media route. How did you sort of first get into that kind of media side? Was it initially straight into motorsport, or did you go to, I don't know, the local newspaper or how did you first take those steps into essentially what you're doing now?
Quite a lot of what we talk about tonight may well involve the phrase by accident, or it was just one of those things. But
We like that. That's good.
It just sort of happened. I mean, the commentating came before journalism, really. And so when I was 16, 17, I'm bearing in mind that at this stage I still can't drive. People are taking me to Alton Park. I got in touch with Mike Cookson, who was the regular Alton circuit commentator, and said, "Hello, I'd like to be a commentator one day. What do I need to do and help?" And Michael was very good and put up with me for a bit. And again, you have to put this in the context of the time, which is something else we'll probably end up saying a lot tonight. So late 80s by this stage, 88, 89, round about then. Long before the internet, long before live timing screens in commentary boxes were only just becoming a thing. So commentators tended to have somebody sat next to them doing a lap chart. So you knew who was where. And that's how Michael had got started. And he said, right, come and do my lap charts for a bit. So I did, and did that for about a season or so, and that got me to the end of 1990. And at that point, I sort of said, any chance of having a go in a commentary box? And for 1991, Alton Park gave me 2 or 3 days on the basis that, well, if he's hopeless, then we can tell him to get lost, and if he's any good, we've not lost anything. And around that time as well, quite a lot of Donington and major BARC meetings. The track commentary was looked after by Robin Bradford, who was commentating himself, and Robin had come from press officer journalism background. And Robin, in fairness, was looking for some new people. And right place, right time. I said, look, I'd like to have a go at this. And fair play to Robin, he gave me 7 or 8, I think, Donington events for 1991. On the basis, as he said to me one day in his sort of baritone theatrical tones, the only way to shut you up was to let you talk. In other words, stop pestering me and we'll give you a go, kind of thing. And it went from there. And again, right place, right time sort of thing. There was a Formula 3 meeting at Alton Park that was scheduled for June 91. And again, in the context of the time, in 1991, there was a massive argument right at the start of the season over film rights. BBC and BHP were doing F3 and British touring cars, and a chap called Brian Kreisky, who ran another TV production company, did a deal with Nicola Fulston to set up Motor Video Productions and control the rights to the what are now largely the MSV, then Brands Hatch Leisure circuits, to try to, if you like, force away the BHP domination of those championships. And the first touring car meeting of 1991 should have been at Alton Park, and it was moved to Silverstone because of the film rights issue. And the Formula 3 meeting went by the board as well. And I can't remember how, but I got this, I think I was on the officials mailing list. And so this piece of paper came through, again, the post, long before email. Are you available to work at Silverstone on whatever the date was, end of June? And I filled in this form and said yes. And it just so happened that the Silverstone commentary team in that era was Ian Titchmarsh and Paul Truswell. Paul was living in America, couldn't get back for that meeting because it was a hastily arranged one. So, well, actually, this bloke's put his hand up, and that's where the Silverstone link went. Again, good timing in a way. So much of this, people say, how do I get involved? How do I become ... A lot of it is just right place, right time, bit of luck, good timing, and there's another example of it.
That's amazing. I mean, I do vaguely remember the kerfuffle with F3 and the BTCC and it all being moved around, and I think BBC Grandstand said, "Oh, we're going to bring you something from Silverstone. It's from Alton. It's now somewhere." I didn't, and obviously that's it. I didn't realise that it was all of that going on behind the scenes.
Yeah. Somewhere over there in my office, in the programme cupboard, because I'm one of these sad people that keeps a programme from every event he's ever been to with all the results filled in. There is the programme from Alton Easter 91 with the touring car entry list and a big line through it, because it was so late that the race was pulled. Programmes already printed. Yeah, John Cleland was on the front cover, I think, for a race that never was.
I didn't realise that it was that late.
Oh yeah.
John's on the front, and if John's on the front, Kev, yeah. For anyone watching, I do get on well with John. It's fine. He won't be too mad. Sorry, John. We've got a load of questions coming in. We are going to come to those, guys. Don't worry, we're going to come with that. Sorry, someone has just mentioned your phrase "off like a stabbed rat." Apologies to Mark Wagstaff for this. I'm really warm. I've got a light on me, so I've got to take this layer off. But I think Mark did ask what size you were, David. If it's not too personal a question.
Oh, large will probably do. Thank you very much.
This is XL, but there you go. That's the work that BTCC Blueprints do. What a t-shirt!
Awesome. That's awesome.
But I've got 2 other layers on. Sorry, Mark. That's excellent. What we got here? Me and my lad, Kyle Wood. Me and my lad recognised you straight away on the circuit commentary at Silverstone for F1 last year. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
See the voice. You
do
have one of those distinctive voices, which obviously helps. I mean, I mentioned that I spoke with Paul Page. You know, he's like North American royalty, and when it comes to broadcasting, he's got one of those voices as well. You know, you kind of hear it and you go, "Oh yeah, that's so and so." So obviously, I guess your big foot in the door moment was that 91, the Silverstone thing. And I mean, but from then you've covered pretty much everything, haven't you? I mean, you've run all. I mean, obviously we know you took over the official ITV BTCC duties 10 years ago now.
I know, it's scary.
No, it doesn't feel like that long, which I guess is a good thing. I mean, when did it start taking you all over the country and all over the world? And I mean, was it from the early 90s that you started to?
Yeah, 91. I did Donington, Silverstone, Alton. I think I went to Snetterton for a couple of clubbies. The very first meeting I did was Donington Grand Prix circuit, and in those days it was 3 commentators. So Robin was the main commentator. There was a second commentator in the old spark plug, and I did the post-race interviews. And that meeting,
I forgot about that.
Yeah. I mean, another conversation in itself. The days in that hateful thing. Was British Formula 3. So there I go to the podiums, Barrichello and David Coulthard, and there was an international Formula Renault race. And then the second meeting was a British touring car meeting, pre-TOCA package. So it was touring cars with lots of BRSCC club racing stuff around it. And by the end of 91, I was commentating, or due to commentate, on a stage of the RAC Rally. And about 2 weeks before that, again, I can't remember how this one came up, but it did. Somebody put me forward for Eurosport to do the RAC Rally, the highlights every night. Great, okay. So problem one is I'm a bit committed on the Sunday because I've got to be at Clumber Park, Nottingham. That's fine, they say. We've got somebody that can cover Sunday. Can you come and do the rest of the event? So I said, well, yeah, that's fine. I mean, by this stage, I'm at sixth form college, so a bit of pocket money is all very welcome. So I said, yeah, that's fine. Where do I come to? They said, Paris. What? Rally's in England, but Eurosport was based in Paris. So
you've got to leave the country to
off I go with all of my notes from the day before, and I go and sit in the studio in Paris. And up until about, I can only assume this went really badly, because up until about 2016, when I went and did Le Mans for them, that was the only thing I ever did for Eurosport. So clearly it had gone down awful. So that was the first television job, even back then. And on the back of that, I started doing things for Hay Fisher in 92, which was doing highlights of lots of national racing. You know, this is the days of Group N, Formula Vauxhall Junior, some of the one make championships. So all of that used to bubble along as a midweek thing, because that was easy. They'd film it, they'd edit it, and then I'd go and put my voice on it. And the track commentary was getting busier and busier at weekends. And then I suppose going out of the country only really came about apart from the occasional trip to Le Mans to do, I did Radio Le Mans for a few years, and then the TV World Feed for a bit. But when Dubai opened, I went and did the first few years in Dubai. The Autodrome, I did a few in Bahrain. And it grew and it grew and it grew. And at this point, by about 08, 09, there was a bit more in terms of television. And I'd done Bathurst for the track commentary, and there was a leaving due for one of the officials on the Saturday night. And Tony Cochrane, who was then the chairman of V8 Supercars, I was introduced to, and he said, "I've been listening to you. You're not bad for a POM. How do you know so much about Australian racing?" And I said, "Well, partly because it's my job. I'm here this weekend, but, do your homework, and partly because I'm interested in it." And he said, "Oh, okay, right." And we chatted for a bit. That was that. And as we were leaving, and I waved goodbye, he beckoned me over and he said, "I want to talk to you tomorrow." Oh, okay. Bit ominous. Anyway, we'll see. Now, trying to find Tony Cochrane at Bathurst is a bit like trying to find rocking horse poo. He is, you can't find him anywhere.
He's an enigma.
Exactly.
He's around.
I did umpteen laps of the paddock, couldn't find him. Spoke to the media team, do you know where he's? No idea. So I thought, well, whatever it was, what the heck. End of Bathurst that year, go to the press conference, Cochrane is there, and I sort of wriggled around the room and said, "Did you want to talk to me?" "Yes," he said. "Right, come to my suite in half an hour." So I duly did. And again, to put it in the context of the time, all Australians' Formula One involvement by that stage had always been the BBC or the ITV feed. So they were used to international racing having an English commentary, English voice, English accent, I should say. And Cochrane quite liked the fact that this POM had been to Bathurst and it was changing it perhaps to an international feel. So he said, "What are you doing on the weekend of November, the whatever it was?" And the answer was nothing. And he said, "Right, you're coming to Bahrain." Oh, I said, "Okay, right." Thinking track commentary. And the backstory to this was that a guy called Matthew White, who was the lead commentator for V8s at the time, was also the presenter of Channel 7's equivalent of the 6 o'clock news called Today Tonight, which was a huge thing for ratings. And going to Bahrain meant that he'd be away for the best part of a week, and Seven didn't really want to lose him for a week. And Cochrane said, "I'd like you to do it." So I was thrown into the lion's den, with an Australian TV company and Australian people that didn't really know who the hell I was, to do 3 live V8 races in Bahrain, which was great experience in many ways because you absolutely had to swim rather than sink. And I learned a lot that weekend, and that was quite something. And of course, watching it from home was a certain A Gow who thought, so Addison can do TV. Okay, and he sort of made a mental note, and one day it came useful.
Yes, just a few years later, as we know. That's amazing. I wasn't aware that. Firstly, you've been to Bathurst, which I'm very incredibly jealous of. That's on my bucket list big time. But there's a few things in there that I want to sort of unpack. Obviously, you are currently sort of, I guess, best known for the BTCC, which is sort of short, 25 minutes, punchy, all action, take a breath at the start and one at the end type thing. You mentioned that you did some commentary on the 24 Hours of Le Mans. I've been lucky enough to speak to a lot of the drivers who have competed in the 24 Hours of Le Mans and some of the winners, like Mark Blundell, Steve Soper, Johansson, Brabham, those kinds of guys. And they say that obviously it's a completely different kind of preparation to anything else. On the commentary side, obviously you're not in the comms box for 24 hours or because that's just silly. But how different is that to the BTC? Because it must be. I've just heard that question in my head, and it sounds very silly. But
well, it is different, of course, and you can't do the whole thing as a 24-hour shouty screamy thing because the race doesn't have shouty screamy things all the way through. You get excited about the exciting bits. Look, it's a bit Sude's Cornerish, this, to people that read Private Eye, but in many ways, doing a long distance race is more rewarding as a commentator because you can make more of an input. A touring car race is great entertainment, it's great racing, but it's a short, sharp race, and as long as you're identifying who's in the right car at the right time, you can't really go too far wrong. A GT race or a 24-hour race, sports car race, you've got to first of all work out which of the 3 drivers is in it at any one time and remember that. Yes, it's on the timing screen, but you can't be looking at that all the time. You've got to be looking at the pictures that are there. You've also got to try and bear in mind strategy. You've got to try and bear in mind different class battles. You've got to try and also bear in mind that although you're looking at, for the sake of argument, that Peugeot battling with that Toyota, what's happened to them already? If you're up to 14 hours through the race, okay, it's a battle in isolation, but what's happened to these cars? What's the backstory? Has that Toyota dominated? Has that Peugeot had a spin? You know, you've got to try and do all of that as well. And I find that more of a challenge. So I get, you know, a lot out of those races. We had an SRO GT race at Paul Ricard a few years ago, the 6-hour race. And I always, for things like that, I always try and keep track of people's pit stops, so you know roughly when they're due in, and if your maths are pretty right, you're okay. And the lead had an early safety car, and the leading Mercedes, it was the Black Falcon Mercedes in those days, pitted about half an hour into the race, and the director keyed down to me on the talkback and said, "Have they just won this race or lost this race? We've got 5.5 hours to go, so I've got to try and talk about this and also scribble some computations as to when they should be pitting, and therefore who the last, you know, are they going to pit last and get the lead, or are they going to pit before the next wave of cars and lose the lead, and try and make sentences all at the same time, you know." And I find that a real challenge to because you know, you can add more to that broadcast than just giving out the race order and a short sharp race where there's less of those strategic things going on, if you like, if that makes any sense.
Wow, and that sort of things that we as fans or people listening, we don't even think about that, you know, that when there's almost like a curveball thrown at you like that, and you know, and your boss is in your ear saying, "Oh, what's gonna crikey," and you got to think on your feet. Wow.
I mean, the talkback is another element. I'm going off a tangent, I know, but that's another element of the job. You know, if you take touring cars, I can have 6 or 7 people in my ears at any one time. So I'm listening to Tim because he's stood next to me. You can have open or closed talkback. So you can either be open all the time, you can hear everything that goes on, or you can have somebody that presses a button purely to talk to you. But if you have it open, so there's Tim, I'll have the director, I'll have his spotter, there'll be the presentation director, there'll be the series editor, I can have the script supervisor talk to me, and then if I turn the volume up on that little box over there, I can listen to the driver that we've got the the Carter commentary link to. Where am I up to? That's 7. Have I missed anybody? You know, so and all of that's going on, and you're trying to process that and filter out the bits that aren't relevant and listen to the bits that are. You know, there's all this chatter going on between, for example, the director and cameraman, and the next instruction is to you about a replay that's coming up, and you've got to be able to process that and realize that now you're being spoken to, and you need to, you know, wise up a bit now.
All while keeping an eye on what's going on the timing screens and on the track,
and keep talking
live on TV.
Yeah, and you can't stop and listen to
Easy.
That. All right, I've got it now. You know, you have to keep going. Yeah.
Wow, that is absolutely staggering. That's crazy. I think a lot of people are going to be amazed at that. Goodness me. So next time anyone says, "Oh, what are the commentary team doing? Oh, they missed something." You're doing that.
Yeah, there is a lot going on. I mean, genuinely, there is. And
yeah, sure there is.
On top of that, we've got, you know, 6 monitors to be looking at, some of which are timing. And then we have 2 different screens. One is the race footage and one is the presentation footage. ITV do it with 2 separate OB trucks. So you have one team of people that look after the presentation. So that's you, Steve and Paul in the studio. It's Louise with the interviews. And then there's a separate truck that's directing the race footage. So as soon as you get cars on the grid, they take charge. So those guys are calling the cameras. And then when you get the winning car into Parc Fermé, they kind of hand it back to the presentation team. And our eyes have to go from that monitor to that monitor to make sure we're talking about the right things and make it seamless. Yeah.
That's amazing. I'm going to look at all the coverage in a completely different way this year. That's fantastic insights. I absolutely love that. I mean, this sort of leads me on to something I was going to touch on a bit later, but do you kind of feel pressure? And is it different? You know, so you kind of mentioned previously, and I think you've done it with Formula 3, where you kind of watch a recorded or an edited bit of footage and add your voice to it. I'm going to assume that's easier than the actual live all go at once.
Yeah, it is, because, you know, if you do make a mistake, you have the ability to change that and not look a wally. Do I feel pressure? If we're taking touring cars in isolation, not pressure, a responsibility to do the job properly and get it right. Yes, because I'm aware, A, I don't want to look a fool for myself. B, I'm a fan. The fact that I'm standing up all day and watching it on a smaller screen than anybody else doesn't make me any less of a fan. I'm still a motor racing fan. I'm just watching it in a slightly different way. So I want it to be right for that reason. But I'm also aware that a touring car audience is very protective of touring car racing.
Very much so, yeah.
You know, if you go back over the years, the fans all have opinions on me, on Toby, on Ben, on whoever's done it before, and just as they have on the drivers and the teams. And there is a responsibility to that family, if you like, to get it right and to do the job properly. I know I'm not going to please everybody. I know that there will be occasions where things I do irritate, but there are things that I do that other people, that different people will like. So you've got to try and balance that. You know, there's an element, I've seen this a few times online, of people saying all Addison ever does is just answer his own questions. Well, the reason that there are lots of questions, can he go through, is the gap coming down, isn't for those touring car fans watching it and are going to watch it come what may. It's for, if you like, my next door neighbour who is sitting there watching it, and he's just about to go back to his newspaper, and if I suddenly shout, can Ingram go through, he'll look up and you've got him back again. The best piece of advice I ever got back in 1992 from Neville Hay. Neville was a stunning commentator. And Neville said to me when I was doing highlight stuff for him, he said, you're not here to show people how much you know, you're here to stop them changing channel. And that has always stuck with me. And that is why there, you know, if you go back and watch it, there are certain phrases, there are certain ways of putting the intonation on a word, playing around with the word. You know, does Ingram go through? Yes. And you elongate this, because by doing this, it's going to irritate somebody, but it's also going to bring that bloke that's just starting to wane with his interest back into the room. And if we've got him back for another couple of laps, we might keep him to the end. We might keep him as a fan for good.
Brilliant. I love that. I absolutely love that. I mean, because, and as you say, I mean, you've got that loyal fan base that are going to tune in, and they've got their favourites and all that kind of thing. And it's not to diminish the importance of them, because obviously they're the guys that, you know, the guys and girls that keep they keep it ticking over, that go every round and watch every round. But it's the, I don't know, like, I guess like the fringe viewers, isn't it, that you want to keep on the hook.
Yeah, and that's what the transition last year onto ITV achieved, because there were people that wouldn't go to ITV4 necessarily, but they would watch the Saturday afternoon or Sunday afternoon rather on ITV and come across touring car racing. And that's an audience you've not really had, I suppose, in a way, since the days of a Grandstand or a World of Sport, where you were shown lots of different things of an afternoon. Now the way that sport in general is presented, there's a football program, there's a darts program, there's snooker, there's, you know, it's isolated sports, and you watch it because you like that. But there's nowhere really that you can watch a bit of horse racing and a bit of athletics and a bit of motor racing like there was in.
There's no real crossover, is there?
No.
Wow. And you've got to keep people engaged, and then especially because back in the day there was 4 channels. Now there's 800. So they've got more choice to go over to. So you've got to keep them involved.
Yeah,
fantastic. Right, you've mentioned about Tim and Louise and Paul and all those people, but you're going to come to them and the BTCC in a minute. I just want to go to the comments, because you've had a load flying in. Now here's a chap who you obviously know, a chap called Julian Brannigan. Is tuning in, and he said, can you ask David who his favourite sound engineer has been over the years? Presumably it's his Geordie mate Julian Brannigan.
Well, it's a close run thing, really, but yeah, I think Jules just about tops it on the basis that he was an Alfa Romeo driver for a time.
Oh, there you go. Fair enough.
Yeah,
fair enough. And he's also said, he said, like, P.S. great conversation, but it's obviously the magnificent television sound engineers that have made David sound good.
It is. I couldn't have done it without them. Absolutely. Yes.
We need these. We need these folk. We need these folk. Mason, what's it give you time to think on next? Yes. Oh, Andrew Edwards. He said you are his favourite commentator.
That's very kind. Thank you, Andrew.
That's lovely. Right, Kay Baker. Oh, that's that's got the word embarrassing in it. We're going to come to that at the end. Right, let's have a quick scroll. Quick scroll, folks. Oh, here's a good one. I mean, obviously, you are covering many series. Because if you weren't commentating on the BTCC as a full thing, what would you like to commentate on anywhere in the world? That's a good question. Maybe something you've not done, or is there anything that you'd like to put your voice to? That's from Katie Eames. Thank you, Katie.
I'm not sure, Katie, there is one specific thing, because I like pretty much all forms of motorsport. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily want to go and do bike racing because I don't know enough about it and I would get found out. But, and Richard, you touched on this earlier on, I've done trucks, I've done historic racing, I've done rallycross. I love pretty much everything. I've done oval racing. So there are lots and lots of things. You know, some people say, would you like to go and do Formula One? Yeah. But it depends, you know, at the expense of what, because you know, I enjoy what I do now, and to give up touring cars and GT and the variety that I do to follow one championship, you know, it would have to be a tough decision. And you know, what are the benefits of that, and what am I giving up in order to do that? So yeah, if I had a time machine and I was allowed one race that I would love to have commentated on, it would be Bathurst in 1987. 1987 was the proper World Touring Car Championship year, when it was proper endurance touring car racing.
Yeah,
and it had everything. It had car drivers. Yeah, it had the RS500, the M3 BMWs, and it had appalling weather, and it had controversy, and the scrutineers somehow managed to find something that no other scrutineer in the world had found, to throw out the Eggenberger Fords, and they gave Peter Brock the win. But
that was the wheel arches, wasn't it? It was the...
There was the wheel arches. I mean, they also had a go at the fuel during the course of the race. They came up with this story in the pits about how the fuel was like rocket fuel. But anyway, ultimately, it was the wheel arches that had been absolutely fine up to Bathurst and were absolutely fine after Bathurst. But Australian rulers seem to be slightly different. I'd love to have been there for that, because that would have been, you know, the collision of Australian touring cars and European touring cars together, I think, would have been quite outstanding. So that would have been one I'd love to have been at. Yeah.
I think that's probably the first one I ever saw as well. I think that was like the Soper and Niedzwitz, wasn't it? And I remember it rained. I think Johnny Cecotto crashed in a BMW coming off the mountain.
He did.
Loads of them ending up
top of it, going up through McPhillamy Park, and it was the year that Glenn Seaton was out on slicks in the early Nissan Skyline Turbo, where the power delivery was like flicking a switch. And I spoke to Glenn about this a few years later when I went to do a race at Sydney. And I mentioned that, and he just rolled his eyes, shook his head. But Mike Raymond, who was the main Aussie touring car commentator, and who, for my money, was the best motorsport commentator, even Mike shut up and watched that, because it was absolute heart in mouth across the top of the mountain on slicks, with the rain getting worse, and he just breathes on the throttle, and suddenly it snaps, and it is just stunning onboard footage. And I still, you know, if I see it now, I still stop what I'm doing to eyes out on stalk to watch it. It was mega stuff there.
It's amazing. I remember that Glenn Seaton. I remember. Bathurst, was it John Bowe, his lap that he put in? John Bowe went around and just did a ridiculous lap, as did
Greg Murphy.
That's it, Greg Murphy. Yeah,
he was the gods. Yeah,
absolutely ridiculous. But you mentioned about Glenn Seaton. The three guys that I followed, it was Glenn Seaton, obviously Peter Brock, and Mark Scaife. And I'd love to have a chat with Glenn or Mark, just to let them go and let them talk. Because
Scaife was somebody I got to meet. I mean, I was a Scaife fan.
Same.
The first V8 supercar race I went to was 2001. It was Sandown. And Scaife, if you like, was in that era, but he'd also been in the end of the Group A era, which we'd seen on television over here. So he was probably the one person. John Bauer, I suppose, was another one, but I could relate to him, to Scaife, and I became a Scaife fan. And again, through right place, right time, I ended up writing for Australian Motorsport News magazine. And so when I went to Bathurst in 2008, the first year for the V8 race, Phil Brannigan, my mate, who was then the editor of the magazine, said to me, we're going out for dinner tomorrow. Oh, okay, fine. We'll pick you up. Thought no more of it. And off we drove to this restaurant, hidden away somewhere in Bathurst. Now, Bathurst is not a place that exudes nice restaurants, but this was a rather exclusive place. And what I subsequently discovered was that every year Holden used to have this dinner for selected guests, and you could ask anything you wanted, but it stayed in that room. So they tell you what you wanted to know, but you did not breathe a word of it. You know, so if you said, you know, look, is that car strictly legal? And they said no, that's where the story stopped. Anyway, and so it was largely the in those days Holden Racing team top brass, but on arrival, all the drivers would be there just for half an hour or so to say hello, and you could have a quick word with. Phil Brannigan, bless him, had told Scaife that there's this funny Pom coming with me, and he's a massive Scaife fan, etc., etc., etc. We are the last two to arrive, and in we walk. Scaife sees Brannigan, so he knows that I'm going to be with him, and in we walk, and he came over and said, "G'day, David, how you going?" And that was, you know, Brannigan's best present to me ever, bless him. And so, yeah, you know, that was my Mark Scaife moment. But yeah, it was, yeah, just fantastic. And that was a scene of racing to go and work in for, I did Bathurst 08, 09, 10 and 11, I think. Yeah, those 4 years, plus Surfers Paradise and Sydney on a couple of occasions. It was fantastic, you know, because everybody was, yes, they were friendly and yes, they were good people, but they also understood the value of the media. So you didn't get anybody that was really arsey. You know, everybody at the end of an interview would smile and thumbs up to the camera, and they'd always have time for people. And it was just a really nice, happy paddock to go and work in.
Love that. Excellent. Oh, man. Mark Scaife coming and saying hello.
I know.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Right. Okay. I think that kind of answered. We did have a question saying if there's a clash from GT and BTCC, which do you choose? And I guess that kind of answers it. You know, what are you?
Well, no. The answer to that is it's kind of touring cars, because there's a contract for that rather stipulates all events or no events. I've managed to get away for the last 2 or 3 years by doing missing one, because it's the Spa 24 Hours, which is a Wednesday to Sunday event, and it's SRO's blue ribbon race. So if I'm going to twist ITV's arm to let me off one, it's that, but I can't really justify it for any other. So this year there are 3 touring car GT World Challenge Europe clashes, but touring cars will get the priority.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Oh, somebody might have something to say about that. Michael Crease is in. Hello. Good evening, Good evening, Creasy. Do hope you're well. Okay. I have a question here before we get onto the BTCC stuff, because we are going to come on that. There's so many questions and comments. Thank you very much, everyone. This is from Mark Wagstaff, and from, there was another lady about which leads us into like Jade Edwards and the females in motorsport. I mean, obviously you're working on the media side, more inside the ropes, things like that. There's a few comments about why are women not getting into motorsport as much. Obviously, we've got F1 Academy, things like that. But I'm just trying to find the comment. I'm just rambling a bit here. There we are. It was Mark Wagstaff who said it. He said his wife, Mrs. BTCC Blueprints, wants to know if David has any views on how the BTCC can bring diversity to the grid, in particular females, as the number of active females seems to be increasing in the support series. Are sponsors simply not grasping the nettle? That's an interesting point.
It is. I don't think there's an easy answer to it. I mean, I would say that the grid should be the best drivers. They shouldn't be there because of, if you like, positive discrimination. You know, if you go back to the 1970s, John Webb, who was the great promoter of British motor racing, used to actively go after putting female drivers on the grid because he understood the promotional value of that. That's not to say they were a novelty act, because people like Desiree Wilson or Davina Yalitza were very, very good. But now, for a sponsor, yes, a female driver does have a certain value because it's different still. But yet you can't really admit that, because that's almost now not the right thing to be admitting to. So I don't have an easy answer to why there aren't more. It might be a generational thing, because if you look at those support series, you're right, there are more and more. There are plenty in esports, there are plenty in karting. Give that 4 or 5 years and they'll be ready, if you like, to come into touring car racing with that level of experience. I don't think it's the BTCC's job to have diversity on the grid. I think it's up to the teams to get the best drivers, and if they are male or female or black and white, then that's what the grid should be. However, if you are focusing on promoting female racing drivers, my belief is that we should have some, or should, that instead of W Series, which to me only ever served to segregate rather than include. And there was nothing new about W Series. You go back to Brooklands in the 1930s, there were female-only races. We've always had women's races. There were bloody ladies' banger races at stock car tracks. There was the Fabergé Fiesta Championship in 1979. There was Formula Woman. Female grids, nothing new. But instead of spunking all that money on W Series, do something like the Racing Steps Foundation did, but for female drivers. So go and find your best 5 or 10, and with that budget, put some into karting, some into F4, some into GB3, and the best ones will progress and progress. And you've got that progression and you've got that support behind them. Too often, you will have seen a sponsor think, okay, I know what we'll do here. We'll put a female racer in that car. Limited experience, limited testing, results don't come, she's rubbish. Well, give her another season, give her 2 seasons, give her some testing, give her some security. You know, Jade
make it a longer term thing.
Yeah, Jade Edwards had that, you know, in touring cars because there was the continuity over a couple of seasons, and Jade, I thought, was a great asset to the grid. I really did.
Absolutely.
And she was popular with the fans, and she's a very, very accomplished racing car driver. But too often of late, and this might partly answer the question from Mrs. BTCC Blueprint, too often we've had people put into a car and not given the opportunity, not given the right opportunity to show what they can do. There's no point taking somebody fresh out of karting, as an example, and putting them into a GT3 Mercedes and wondering why the lap times aren't as good as Jules Gounon. Bloody obvious. So don't do it. Put them in Porter Cayman Sprint Challenge for 2 seasons, let them learn and let them develop, and then promote them. Don't throw them in at the deep end. It's just pointless.
But that seems to be the thing in all sports, whether it's football. You know, someone brings a manager in, they want results now. It takes time, and it's kind of the world we live in. It's the instant gratification. It's the social media. You know, if you want to book a holiday, you book it on your phone. It happens now. People don't want to wait. You know, I think that's why W Series fell down. Everyone was thinking, right, W Series, Jamie Chadwick should be in F1. So, well, no, it doesn't work like that. And as you touch on, you know, I think things have to take time. Otherwise, it's just going to be perceived as a short-term, female marketing opportunity, 3 races, and then you're out the door.
Yeah,
which is not what anyone wants to see.
No, I mean that's an opinion. I don't say that's the answer, but that is my feeling about it.
Yeah, I would agree on that as well. We have a chap tuning in on YouTube. His handle is that guy from SETI Alpha V. Whatever your real name is, thank you for your comments. So he said over in the US, racing in the USA, he says we get David commentating on the Sports Car World Challenge with John Watson here in the US. The BTCC footage has sadly disappeared. But further down it says, what's it like working with John Watson? Because I mean, he's a proper motorsport chap, isn't he? I mean, he's been there and he's been there and done it. You know, F1 race winner and everything else.
It's a bit surreal in a way. I mean, I was a 9-year-old in the grandstand when Watty won the British Grand Prix, and he's been on the phone twice today to me. And you know, I now count John as a friend, and he is hugely entertaining. John is a huge enthusiast for Formula One, and is excellent with a pithy comment. You know, John has always had an opinion. You might not agree with it, but that's not the point. He has an opinion and something to say, and he says it in a good way, which is why, you know, if there is something controversial or there's a talking point in Formula One, you can pretty much guarantee that at 7:30 on the Today programme, Watty will be being interviewed because he has an opinion and he's not afraid to voice it. What's it like working with him? Great fun, because it took us a season or so to really gel. Tim and I managed to do it straight away. It took Watty and I a bit longer, but now I know what buttons to press and he knows what buttons to press. We get on fine. And John is controversial, yes, but that's what he's there to do. He's there to stimulate the the viewer's mind and opinion, and I'm sure lots of them shout at the screen and argue, no, that's, I don't, you know, you're talking rubbish, but he's got you involved. And John doesn't necessarily do a vast amount of homework. He's very happy to let me go off and worry about drivers' CVs, but John understands, of course, what it's like to race a car and what the drivers are going through, and he is able to deliver good, acerbic and memorable comments, and it is great fun working with him. It really is, because he's not short of an opinion. Take him away from a microphone and the opinions are even more colourful. It's great. Yeah,
I'm sure. No, that's fantastic, John. I mean, oh yeah, John's a guy I'd love to have on here, but we'll see. Right, what have we got here? Thank you very much. John Cavill, just going back to the previous point, it says last year in GB4, the girls made up an important percentage of the grid in GB4. Yes, they did.
Yeah.
Megan Johnson, Chloe Grant, and all those who've gone on to better things. So, yeah, if they're good enough, they will rise to the top, regardless of gender. Sorry, that John Watson question was from Mason789. Thank you, Mason. Right, okay. We're going to come back to some memories that people have put in of bumping into you in restaurants and whatnot, which is good. That's always a nice thing to end on. But we've got to talk about the BTCC. I think it was Diffan Evans, evening Diffan, tunes in every week. Thank you very much. He said, how did it come to be that you were thrown into the BTCC comms box in 2013? It was obviously the previous commentator had been seconded, hadn't he?
Well, it almost happened the year before, in a sense, because the catalyst for all this was the shuffling of TV film rights when Sky came along and got hold of Formula One, which therefore moved some of the BBC people across to Sky, and the BBC then needed a commentator, and so Ben Edwards left touring cars to go and do F1, and I think there was a short list of people that were considered. There was me, I think Martin Haven, Toby Moody, and it was felt that Toby, who had a sizable following through his motorbike commentary and had done a huge amount of live broadcasting, was probably a better bet than me because of his experience. Fair enough. And so Toby did it for a year and did a fine job. Some people liked him, some people didn't, which we're all going to get. And then at the end of the year, I think from memory, he was offered a big chunk of work back in motorbike racing. And there were 7 clashes with touring cars. So he couldn't really miss 7 of the 5. So again,
I think it was MotoGP, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think that's right.
I think
he couldn't really miss 7 of the MotoGP rounds, and missing 7 touring car events was, missing the season. So when would this be? Late October, early November 2012. I got this phone call one evening. Looked at my phone, didn't recognise the number. It went to the answer phone, and it was from Alan Gow to say Toby might not be able to carry on. Are you interested? And so it went from there. And it took a bit of time to get things over the line, as it were. But it was really Toby going back to MotoGP. I don't think there was any great desire to replace him that I'm aware of. But he felt that he would rather go and do MotoGP, or that was a better deal for him. And so the door was open, and I didn't really need to be asked twice.
Yeah, I guess when that comes along, you're like, let me think for half a second.
Yeah.
Fantastic. No, good stuff. I mean, through my sort of little research and a little post I popped out earlier, your first BTCC weekend, I mean, it was quite a lively one. I remember, was it obviously some fella called Plato? Apparently he's been around for a while. He had a couple of wins, but Gordon Shedden got disqualified, and there was all kinds of stuff going on. I think practice was held up with a red flag and all that kind of a thing. I mean, what are your sort of memories of that first weekend? Obviously, it was your first time doing it. You were the new kind of voice of the BTCC, and all this was kicking off with all the other stuff going on that we mentioned earlier. Did it feel like a baptism of fire, I suppose?
Yeah, it did. It did a bit, because again, going back to what I said earlier on, you are aware of the protective nature, if you like, of a touring car fan, excuse me, and you don't want to let them down. There are various memories of that weekend. The first one is that it was excruciatingly Arctic, the weather, particularly on Saturday. And I always go and watch one of the practice sessions out on the side of the circuit. And I can remember being absolutely frozen stiff. I think it snowed a little bit.
Yeah, I was actually there on the Sunday, and it was bright and sunny. But as you say, and it was freezing. It made Knock Hill like Hawaii, you know. It was so cold.
Well, exactly. So that was one memory. The other memory was that I was going down with the lurgy, so I felt a bit like a sort of 7-cylinder, not a V8. I mean, bits of the racing, yes, you're right. Shedden had a ride height infringement and was disqualified. There was the great battle was it the first race between Plato and Andrew Jordan, and Andrew made his last bend lunge, and they both went into the gravel and scrabbled out the other side, and Jason won it.
Yeah.
And the other abiding memory, and I know this might sound a bit random, but we stayed in this god-awful hotel. Was it a Best Western, or I mean, it should have been condemned probably, but they had was it a wedding that was fancy dress, or it was anyway? There was a fancy dress theme to whatever was going on, and with the amount of ale that flowed, there was a fight. Now, if you've ever seen a Smurf knocking 7 bells out of a superhero, you'll know what I mean. But it was the most surreal fight to witness with people. I mean, because these were proper full-on good costumes, but you know, there's a Smurf and there's Captain Marvel and there's Spider-Man, and they're all having a fight. I'm thinking, glamorous television, isn't it? Glad I signed up for this. Just bizarre. That was my first weekend.
That's fantastic. What a start.
Yeah,
what a start. I guess like the second weekend, you must have thought, oh, this is nice. This is good.
Yeah, second weekend we went for a Chinese. It was much more straightforward. Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Yeah, someone's just Oliver Taylor's just said, "Yep, that sounds like a Best Western." Nothing against Best Western in case. Nothing against Best Western in case there's any representatives watching. Fine establishment. No, that's fantastic.
That was the first weekend. I mean, yeah, it was it. And then I drove home Sunday night, and I was doing the track commentary at Alton Park on the Monday for British GT. By which stage I'd virtually lost my voice. I was very croaky to start off with, and then. Yes. Anyway, so that was that Easter weekend, 2013. God, long time.
13, yeah. And we've got Diffin Evans has said Rob Austin had a massive off between Paddock Hill Bend and Druids after a touch with Dave Newsham. I remember that. Yeah, he did. Yeah, the right old jump. Yeah, because he finished third in that first race. He was behind Plato and Jordan, wasn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, and actually that was one of the rare occasions where race control overruled the ITV team, because quite often if there's a safety car period, and we're on a break, ITV talk to one of the clerks and say, you know, look, we've got another minute left on this break. How are we doing on the clear up operation? And if you know, there is no point restarting a race if we are still on a break. So quite often you might think, why are they still behind the safety car? Well, the reason is that we've got another 30 seconds to go on a break, and then we can go back to the racing. But that was the one occasion. Bob Lentle, I think, was the clerk, and Bob said, no, it's so cold, we've got to let them go because the tyre temperatures are dropping.
Right.
We've got to get them going this lap. So when we came back to them, they were all racing. That's one of the, I think it's about the only I can remember that in my time doing this, because it was so bloody cold and the tyre temperature had gone, you know, sub-zero virtually.
Wow. That's amazing. I didn't realise that was, you know, there was that kind of discussion about getting things restarted. Our friend in the US has said that he was there all weekend. He slept in the car and froze. Not surprised. Not surprised. I saw something before there. Another question. Scott Addison, we'll come to your question, Scott. I just want to pick up on a few things that have happened over the years. I mean, we discussed this over email, things like that, earlier on today. The one that I'm going to sort of pull out is the incident at Croft qualifying 2017. We all know what happened. You know, the heavens opened, and was it Luke Davenport and Jeff Smith and I think Martin Decker was involved. There's 5 or 6 cars were in a horrendous accident. I mean, it was very obvious very soon after it happened that it was a severe one. I believe Luke Davenport was put into a medically induced coma afterwards. was it Water Neils? I can't remember. Someone had had a broken leg, and it was obviously a horrendous incident. When that kind of a
I want to say it
thing,
was Aaron Smith, wasn't it? Was it Aaron Smith who was another one that was involved?
it was Aaron Taylor. Yes, it was Aaron Taylor. I knew there was a hyphen in there. Sorry, Aaron. It was Aaron. Yeah, Aaron Taylor Smith. Really sort of bad injuries and very serious, and luckily the footage is very rainy, so we can't see all the details, which is good because we don't really want to. When that kind of a thing happens, just using that as an example, it must be quite difficult to, obviously you're still on air, you've got to articulate what's going on without worrying people, without sounding shocked yourself. I mean, that must be very difficult to do.
It is, but we're talking about this with hindsight. At the time, you don't know. We see a lot of accidents in motorsport, and 9 times out of 10, the driver gets out and walks away. And I'll hold my hands up, rightly or wrongly, to saying I'm conditioned now to expecting people to get out and walk away. If I were commentating in the 50s or 60s, I'd probably have the complete opposite opinion. But so often now, you see a what looks like a serious accident, and the driver just jumps out and walks away. So you think, okay, it's going to happen this time. At the time, watching cars plough in, that's dramatic. That is important. That is the focus of attention. So 2 cars have gone off. Is there going to be a third? Now, it was interesting because I was, to say getting excited about it isn't quite the right phrase, but I'm sort of trying to describe this and explain what's going on. Tim next to me was wincing and didn't really want to watch because he is looking at that as a driver, knowing, having been in accidents of varying levels, what that must be feeling like. So for him, it probably wasn't a very pleasant half a minute of footage. I don't have that. I'm not a racing perspective. Yeah, so I'm looking at it from the drama, from the story, if you like, an editorial point of view, which is that's 3 cars, 4 cars, 5 cars. I was surprised it took so long to red flag it. I mean, I think Matt James at MN timed it, and it was over half a minute from me saying, was it Andrew Jordan who's gone off? This is going to be a red flag, to the red flag actually coming out. You know that if there's a car on wet grass, it ain't going anywhere. There's going to be a red. And for various reasons that I probably wouldn't to explain, it took a long time for that to actually happen. But looking at it now with hindsight, should we have got so excited about it? Well, probably not. Now we know that drivers were quite badly injured. But at the time, you don't know. You go and look at any of these YouTube racing fail, crash and fail, whatever channels, and people cartwheeling rally cars. They're in mid-air and the crowd are cheering. They don't know whether the bloke's alive or dead. But there's a big cheer because there's a crash. And it's a little bit like that. At the time, you're not expecting anything nasty. And in fairness, the fact that the cars like Jeff Smith's and Luke Davenport's took more than one big hit was what really did for them, because the cars were designed for one impact, and there were more than one impact in those cases. So no, it wasn't pleasant. But at the time, not appreciating until it had all stopped and the medical team had got there quite how serious it was. That's when the story started to change a bit, really. Yeah, sure. And this is something that you kind of see with keyboard warriors and such like. They say, "Oh, I can't believe so," and not you or touring cars or anything else, but just on an event that ended up being sadly fatal or serious or whatever it might be. People say, "Oh, I can't believe the commentators were saying this and they were doing this." It's like, when it's live, you don't know what the situation is. So, and I think that's a lot of, I think a lot of people look at it knowing what the outcome was rather than just appreciating the event, as it were. So, which is that kind of backs. Then things that you should or shouldn't do, whether it's for TV or for the track commentary, in that clear-up operation. There's no point describing the medical team are doing this and the drivers being cut out, because all that's going to do is alarm people. You don't need to do that. Talk about something else. There was a commentator in the 1960s called Kenneth Best who commentated, I think, at one of the Aintree Grand Prix. And Kenneth Best was in the commentary box near a fair accident, and he ended up getting people to study the clouds. And this sounds completely random now, but go with me. And he was saying, when you see that big fluffy one up there, now that's a, I'm going to get this wrong, but that's a cumulonimbus cloud, and that's a da, 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 da. And all of these people are now looking up. They're not looking at the car. They're not looking at the doctor. They're not looking at the driver, and they're all looking up. And that is where, you know, a good data knows how to deal with the aftermath. You know, I've had to, for the circuit commentary, talk about long red flag situations or been at events where there's been a fatal accident. And no, they're not pleasant, but that's when you earn your corn, having to deal with it.
Yeah. That kind of challenge. That's amazing. Yeah, that kind of like diversion almost. One thing I'm going to move on to is 2019. Actually, it was just before I started the page up, actually. What I thought was handled very well by you, by Paul, Tim, Louise, Steve Ryder, was the situation surrounding Sam Tordoff just ahead of Knock Hill with what happened in his personal life. And there was a few things on the side of the car for Baby Arlo and things like that. And I just wanted to say I thought that was absolutely brilliantly handled by everyone, because it was obviously very difficult, incredibly sad what happened. And I think I saw a lot of things across social media saying how brilliantly handled it was. So I think hats off to everyone who was involved with that, because that was beautifully done, very nicely done. Happier subject. I've been sort of thinking about this the last sort of 2 or 3 days. We had the Diamond Double weekend at Snetterton. In obviously Matt Neal won the race, the big race and everything, the huge trophy and everything else. And he and Jack Goff were joking. It's like, oh, I didn't realize I was going to make such a big deal out of it. You know, Jack said he would have tried harder if things like that. Obviously, you were, I guess, told to promote this 70th anniversary and all that kind of thing. I mean, were you told to really sort of big it up a bit?
You know what? No, I don't think we were. And what makes the question even harder to answer is I wasn't there on the Saturday because I was at Spa. In those days, that Snetterton clashed with the Spa 24 hours, and I didn't do qualifying. I was at Spa, and I'd do the first couple of hours and then hoof it back to the Channel Tunnel and get to the hotel about 3 a.m., try and get some sleep and be at the circuit for 7 o'clock for breakfast, because every race morning at 8 a.m. I voice the qualifying report. So that gets scripted on the Saturday night. I voice it, and then they cut the pictures to my script. So I had to be there at 8 o'clock, come what may. So I felt quite peripheral to that weekend.
Right.
It was, on a personal level, it was almost like, oh, okay, right, there's that extra race to do now. And yes, it meant something. But no, I certainly haven't had any conversation with Alan Gow about needing to promote it. I think the importance of it just kind of spoke for itself, really. It was something new. It was something different. It was something that we didn't normally get. And therefore, because it was different, it was unique. That's why it became special in that respect, really. It was more than just your regular 3 races, really.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the BTCC on its official page and social media did a very good job of pushing it. I think it was cracking. It was a cracking race as well, which was good. All the special liveries and all that. Nice event for everyone. Sorry. Mark Wagstaff, just another one that was very well dealt with was Mr. Thompson's barrel roll. You know, Bobby Thompson, his crash at Croft. That was very well dealt with, because that was I think another one was Rory Butcher at Silverstone. Well dealt with, but they got out.
Yeah.
Let's have a quick look. Oh, Andrew Edwards. I mean, we touched on this before. Andrew Edwards, he said, I was at Thruxton when Colin White had his huge accident last year. Worst BTCC race day I've ever experienced. Thankfully, Colin has made a remarkable recovery. Yes, he has. And, you know, we wish Colin well. It's great that he's back. But again, that was another one that was really well handled by everyone, because it was obvious it was severe. So, yeah, just goes to show the pros we have dealing with BTCC.
Yeah, please. Certainly, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Never any bad words about that one, for sure. Again, back on a happier subject. Again, back in 2019, the finale at Brands Hatch. Just an absolutely mad day. I mean, you said that you're a fan first and foremost. I was at that. I'd actually won a competition. I had a chance to win it was the RCIB insurance team, and they'd sort of wrapped a car, and there was a scale electric thing, and it was rigged. I was robbed. I was absolutely robbed of it. I should have won. Anyone that was there will know. If Rory Butcher and Mike Bushell watch this, they will know, because they protested my case. Anyway, it's fine. as a fan, it was impossible to keep a lid on it, regardless of who you're a fan of, whether you're a fan of West Surrey Racing and Colin, or Team Dynamics, or Dan Camish, or Andrew Jordan, or whoever it might be, or even if you're just a racing fan. It was an incredible day. Did you ever struggle to keep the commentator hat on? Because obviously when Colin got turned around in the first race, and then Dan had his unfortunate accident at the end, and I mean, everyone was going ballistic. Were you sort of trying to...
What you can't see, of course, are the hand gestures.
Right.
And so when Colin got turned around by Matt Neal, and this wasn't because it was Colin Turkington or Matt Neal, it was that a driver had been turned around by another.
Yes.
As I'm talking about, it was quite a lot of this, look at that hand waving, in that respect. But yeah, I mean, it is occasionally. No, do I struggle to keep the commentator hat on? No, because I'm not saying it's an act or it's a role that you play, but you know what your job is. You know what your focus is.
And you got into it.
Yeah, and you know what you should be doing. But I mean, yeah, that was a day of pure drama. The final race, as you say, with the Camish brake exploding and Turkington getting the championship, was outstanding. I mean, the Mark Cross was the director that day. Tony Barber was sat next to him as the vision mixer, and between them they made this split-second call to cut off whatever we'd been looking at to go to Camish and off the road. And that was brilliantly done. And to this day, I thank my stars that I got the right Honda and in identifying which one it was that was going off. Because if I'd said, "Oh, who's that?" it wouldn't have, I don't think it would have had the same impact. Thankfully, I identified it right. I'm not trying to make myself look clever, but genuinely, I think if I'd have said, "Look at that," or "Somebody's off," it wouldn't have had the same impact as quickly saying who it was and therefore what that was going to do for the championship. So in that respect, I think it made very, very good TV. And you could see at the end of the day, excuse me, how much it meant to Colin. Because when for the final race, I always get the ability to talk to the champion on the in lap.
Yeah.
I can't get a word in because he's so busy screaming and shouting. That's not Colin Turkington. He was so...
Colin doesn't do that.
So, yeah, exactly. And I had to wait and wait and wait. And finally they said, "Right, go now." Because again, in the OB trucks, they can monitor the audio to the team and the driver, and somebody will shout, so right, press my little red button and I can talk to him. Same on the green flag lap, they'll say it's clear to talk to whichever driver. So I got that, and yeah, you could see or you could hear rather how delighted he was. But that was a day of great drama, and that's one of the beauties of finals day. It's not just you get a champion; it's that there is a story to it. Go back to the Andrew Jordan year that you touched on earlier on. That was he went there as the championship leader. I think there was one of 5 drivers that could have won it.
Yeah.
Middle race, he got blitzed, didn't he? Because he tangled with Aaron Smith as well as going up through Surtees. It did the rear suspension. He was out. And I can remember watching my phone light up with people sending me messages saying, "What happens now? Has he lost the championship? Can he still win it? We've got one more race to go." We had, whichever year it was that Gordon Shedden won it, was it 17 or no, not 17, it was earlier, 14, 15. Anyway.
But he won it in the last round, didn't he?
Yeah, and I mean, this sticks in my mind because if you remember, he was way, way back on the grid.
Yeah.
Jason Plato was leading, and I kept making the point, Plato can do no more than this. He has to win the race. He is leading. Everything now is out of his hands. And Shedden was, 24th, and then he was 22nd, and he was 20th. And if he got to whatever it was, he was going to tie on points with Jason and win on a tie break of wins. And one more place, and he would be ahead on points. And I came away from that race really proud of what we'd done. We'd stayed on top of that story, all that we'd been able to explain, I believe, to people what Jason had to do, what Gordon had to do, and how the story was evolving. Right, Jason's leading, kind of ignore him. He can't do any more. He can't influence this now. But Shedden can, and he's got to get past him and him and him and him and him and him. And he won the championship. And I remember coming off there thinking we did a really good job there. We explained that editorially all the way through. Yeah. And that night I got an email off somebody saying, you must have wet your pants when Shedden got into the points and won the championship. You're so biased to Gordon Shedden. You kept talking about Shedden. What about Jason? I thought, have you rather missed the point here? Because Shedden was
like Jason's side of the story's done. You know, Jason's done his side of the story, isn't he?
But the reason I kept talking about Gordon was that was the variable. That was the thing that was going to influence the championship. So for 2/3 of the race, Jason was champion. But the reason we're focusing on Colin is because he's gaining place. And that's going to change things.
That's where the drama is.
Exactly. So, you know, strange, isn't it? Some days you think you've done a good job and people don't always agree. But I still maintain that we explain that editorial, that narrative really well to get to the end. You know, one more place and he's going to tie on points but win on a tie break. If he gains 2 more places, he'll win the championship, and you can watch it happen, and you watch the next place, and there's the story.
And I would agree that you did a great job with it, because you mentioned those fringe people who were tuning in and ducking out. They would have understood exactly what was going on and why on that day, because it was changing every 15 seconds, wasn't it? It was flying through the just hang on, I just want to come back to
just to interrupt you. At the TOCA Awards that year, because if you remember, some people made life easier for Gordon to get through the pack, and the TOCA Awards that year was at a holiday, and I can't remember whereabouts it was, somewhere Oxfordshire way, and we used to have the awards before dinner, and it was this hotel had its own little theatre for conferences and things, and so Steve Ryder was hosting it, and the drivers that won awards were all in a separate area up at the top. So instead of wasting time as people shuffle past people's chairs and go down the steps, they were all held at the top. And Steve made the point that over the course of the evening, we'll ask the award winners to come forward, please. So if, for example, Gordon Shedden needs to come up, perhaps you could all get out of the way. It seemed to work very well at Brands Hatch, so let's see how it gets. Let's see how it gets on here. Got a big cheer.
Ooh. Just saw a comment there. A guy called Lee Hardiman. He said he was actually with me in the suite at Brands Hatch when we did the Scale Electric thing, and he said that I should have won. And but yeah, the young lady who actually won it, she did put it up for sale. She had the wrap taken off because they said it was going to be all souped up and tuned up, and it wasn't. Sorry. And I said, yeah, if I'd have won the car, would I have kept it? No, I wouldn't. I'd have done what she did. I'd have sold it as well. Right, moving on. Yeah, because I've got 2 kids and a Honda Civic's no good to me, I'm afraid. Okay, what have we got here? Let's just have a quick move on. Again, stick with the BTCC. I mean, you've obviously been doing it for 10 years now, and you've overseen almost like a changing of the guard, I guess. We've had the guys like Andrew Jordan, Jason Plato, and Matt Neal, and all these guys who have been doing it since about 1854. And we've got all these young guys coming through, or have been young guys now, seasoned guys like Ash Sutton, and we've got Jake Hill and Tom Ingram, champion, all that. There's some good drivers on the grid now, isn't there? And there's a good mix. Are there any that you kind of enjoy speaking to or interacting with, or just watching race more than any others? Or
yeah, it's hard.
I'm not trying to get into trouble.
Yeah, on a personal basis, it's hard if you like to sometimes divorce yourself from being a neutral commentator to having a sort of friendship with the driver. I suppose I'm pretty friendly with Tom Ingram. I'm pretty friendly with Dan Rowbottom of the current crop, but I get on absolutely fine with most of them, I like to think. And yes, they are a good bunch of people that are in that championship, and that's evinced by the way they are with fans during autograph sessions and pit lane walkabouts, and when you bump into them in the paddock or wherever it might be. In terms of the racing, I think that they are exactly what the championship needs. You're right about a changing of the guard, and we've got exciting talent on that grid, and they've not peaked. They've not, Ash Sutton's only going to get better.
Yeah,
Tom Ingram is going to get better. Jake Hill is going to get better, because the sort of misapprehension is that once they've got to a given level of touring car racing, they've made it to the BTCC. That's their level. That's how good they are. They're not. Look at how Tom Ingram has progressed, and he's become a far more complete driver. So has Jake Hill. Ash has dialed out some of that wildman streak that we quite enjoyed when he was in the Infinity. And after those seasons where you were, you stick him in a battle and your nails were on the desk thinking, oh, come on, Ash. Oh, that's gone. Now he's thinking more about points and so on and so forth.
He seems to have leveled. He's calmed, thinking about the actual racecraft, isn't he? I think.
Yeah, I mean, he and Tony Carosa, his engineer, developed a safe word for the following season. I think I said it was "don't." So if he was coming up to have a go at somebody and points were in jeopardy, Tony would just say "don't." Okay. Ash would throttle back a bit, but that is part of winning a championship, which he's become very proficient at. And just to stretch the point a bit, you talk about young drivers and a changing of the guard, and you're absolutely right. But actually, I don't believe now it's purely the driver that makes the difference, and the youth of the engineer is interesting. If you look at Tom Ingram, Spencer Aldridge, you've got two young blokes who form a great double act. Ash and Tony Carosa are the same. Both Tony and Spencer have both been intrinsically involved in the build of the cars. So Spencer was heavily involved in the Corolla. That was a winner. He's gone off and made that Hyundai even better. Carosa with Ash, whether it was with the Infinity or bringing that knowledge to the Ford Focus most recently, or the Subaru before it, whatever it might be. And much as we now talk about the ability of the driver, I think part and parcel of it now is to have, if you like, your wingman, your absolute gun engineer, to work with you, to understand you, to know what you want before you know it yourself, and get the best out of you and the car and all of that synergy together.
Which is, I think, is a very good point. I mean, and that probably goes across for all motorsport, isn't it? It's not just about the driver now; it's about the whole team and the whole package. And we keep saying, like Lewis Hamilton always goes and praises the team first, or he always has done, and it's a huge part of it. Mention Lewis Hamilton. We've got Nick Hamilton, obviously, on the grid. He gets a lot of stick for it. It's just a ridiculous amount of stick. We do hope he's back on the grid this year, because I think he's just an incredible guy. He's just, I mean, even just to talk to, he's just the nicest guy, isn't he, Nick? And even to be able to get into the car and race it, well, not even to race it, even to get into the car, it's just incredible what he does, isn't it?
It is. I mean, and to put yourself through that, knowing that you're not going to be a race winner, he gets out of the touring car championship what he gets out of it. He gets that adrenaline rush. He gets that whatever it is that motivates him, and he would rather do that in that than say Carrera Cup or Minis. He wants to be on the touring car grid, even though it puts him more exposed to the spotlight. There's nowhere to hide. He's prepared to put himself in that situation. Fair play. And of course, people can criticize him, and they will. But people are always at the back of the grid in any category, and he's a far better racing driver than I would ever be, and many other people will ever be. So okay, he might not be a podium finisher in the BTCC, and it could happen. Could happen on a reverse grid race or a mixed weather race. You never know. That's the beauty of motor racing. But give him credit for trying, and give him credit for doing it. I mean, last year when he got this new braking system, which he was able to use with more confidence and apply pressure to it, and because that was the real weakness, he couldn't physically push the brake as hard as he needed to at the last moment. So the braking system worked better for him, and strides were made, and that was great. And so, and he's not 30 seconds a lap slower than anybody else. So I think he gets a bad press, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that a lot of people assume that he's only where he is because of Lewis, which is nonsense. Nick doesn't take anything, does he? He doesn't take any help. Lewis has offered a few times, and he's just said, "No, I'm doing this my way." Which, and I'm going to back him to the hill. If anyone has a go at him, my response is, "Go on, then you have a go."
Right, exactly. First of all, you go out and get the sponsors.
Just see how you get on.
Yeah, go and get the sponsors, and then go and drive the car. Absolutely.
Yeah. Because I would be 30 seconds a lap behind everyone. KT Eames, Nick is a fantastic driver. Yes, absolutely. Just very aware of the time. I don't want to keep anyone too long. A good thing, question here from Diffan Evans. I mean, he says, what do we think of how the grid is shaping up? So far this year? Obviously, there's a lot of changes. Lots of TBLs being moved around, new teams and everything else. One team notably has been silent for a while, which I'm not going to name who. I think we can all guess who that is, which is a surprise. But it feels like it's going to be a bit different this year. There's a lot of people of teams and drivers maybe struggling for some backing or things like that. It just feels like a bit of an unknown this year. I mean, more so than usual. That might be just my perception. I don't know, but just wondering what
I
you're.
think we're going to have we're going to miss one or two familiar faces in the paddock.
Yeah.
But I think the pointy end of the grid will be as competitive as ever.
Yes.
Your Ingrams, your Suttons, your Butchers, Camish, Rowbottom, Hill, Turkington. Throw Jelly, throw Morgan into that mix as well. Throw Josh Cook into it. That's 10 already. That's about a third of the grid. They're all potential race winners, straight champions. We've got three new drivers coming in, 4 new drivers, and a bit of team swapping as well. Plus, you've got the return of an option tyre. You've got a tweak to the hybrid. You've got the top 10 showdown qualifying. I know that qualifying is a means to an end, but it will give you a jumble grid, which in turn will give you, give you a different feel for the first race. So I think last year was the transitional year. Okay, here's hybrid. Here's a new Toka engine. Let's have a look at this. Let's see how this works. Okay, right, yeah. So hybrid does that and that, but it needs to do more of that. That's tweaked. Okay, we've had a few race 1 and race 2 winners. Right, okay, bring option tyre. A lot of people bang on about, oh, it's not as good as the Super Touring days. It's a different beast, and the focus these days is on exciting racing for the fan, be them at the side of the track or on television. And I think this year, with the tweaks to the regulations and the return of the option tyre, will make the racing better, I believe. Last year it wasn't exactly bad, but it was perhaps a purer style of racing, because the hybrid wasn't making the difference that 75 kilos against no extra weight would make, for example. And at some circuits it was good, and other circuits it wasn't so good. But I think this year will be better again. So I think it's harder to predict a champion this year because of the return of more variable factors, frankly.
Yeah, there's more things that are outside the driver's control, I suppose, or it's all about strategy and all that kind of thing, which is all very good. I actually had Ronan Pearson on here. I think he's going to hit the ground running. I think he could be very, very strong this year, but we will see. We'll see. So a couple of bit. We had some questions actually that came in on your side. We had the 2004 BTCC Masters, which I said we were going to talk about. Would you like to see a revival of that because I think they used to see it back then.
That's right. That was yes.
They used to see it back then, and would it be good? And what should they use? That's a great question.
Yes and no. Would I like to see it back? Because I'm not sure what it proved. In as much as it was a good race in itself,
a gimmicky thing.
But there are some drivers that are more active than others that have raced in the championship. So the more active or the more used to front wheel drive would always have an advantage. So if you put Ash Sutton in the same race as John Cleland, with all due deference to John, he does not do as much racing as Ash with 3 races in a day. Of course, you give it a good shot, but I'm not entirely sure that that's a fair fight. So what do you then do? Well, you can't have touring car champions from the last 10 years because it's a pretty small grid, with Shedden and Turkington and Sutton and Jordan, and that's about your lot almost. So, look, it was a nice idea, and the other reason that it was possible and probably isn't possible anymore is that Seat had run that championship out of one central base, so it had all the cars and it didn't need them again. So at the end of that race, it didn't matter what state they were in because they were bringing in a new Seat race car for the one make championship the following year. But I suppose, to be fair to the question, yes, if we did have it, it would be good fun. And if we're able to have a magic wand and do this, then I'd put them in TVR Tuscans and then I'd run for cover.
What a great shout that is. Yeah, goodness me. Could you imagine? Yeah, that would be a great leveler in the Tuscan.
Because that remains one of my all-time best championships was Tuscans. I was there at Donington for the first ever Tuscan race. And I used to do them for television, and I just thought they were stunning cars, and you know, late 90s when the grids were 40 plus and they had a qualifying race. I mean, that was a golden age for that one make championship. It was brilliant.
Some proper racing. Craig Homer, was it Craig Homer? Yes, get Andy Rouse out. Goodness me, if Andy came back and drive a Tuscan, that'd be something to see. He was actually out last year, I think, in his old Caliber car, doing some laps.
Yeah, Michael Caines got it, and he got Andy to come and drive it at Silverstone. That's right.
Yeah, very cool. We love Andy. Andy's great. Right, okay. Very quickly, we've got to move on to. So many people have emailed me saying, ask him about Tim Harvey and Paul O'Neill. I mean, we love him. I mean, I bumped into Paul on Tuesday and had a chat with him and everything else like that. I almost don't want to ask what they're like to work with because I think they're kind of not. I mean, you guys are obviously very professional, very, very good at what you do, but you must have a lot of fun with them as well because they're just, especially Paul. He's that kind of a character, isn't he? Everyone loves him. I mean,
Paul and I don't get to do that much together because he does the support races and I'm doing touring cars and the Porsches. But because he lives nearby, you know, we go out now and again and have a cup of coffee and slag everybody off and laugh at people in the local Starbucks and all of this. But no, I mean, Paul is a good character, and he has that persona that people warm to. You know, I'm not being rude when I say he's not a polished presenter with perfect use of the English language in the same way that an Eddie Waring wasn't, or a John Motson perhaps had his quirks, but there's something about that a viewer likes, that you know, that imperfectness, if you like, is appealing. But he's great fun, and we can mercilessly take the mickey out of him, and he enters into the spirit of it. And Tim, likewise, is very, very professional. You know, Tim has been in that paddock since 1987 when he was racing Rovers, and there are some drivers that I've worked with over the years who can't be bothered with it. They've been asked to come and do the commentary and they play at it. And so they rock up and they haven't got a grid sheet, or they haven't got an entry list, and they don't know who's in what car, and it sounds awful. Tim is not that sort of a person. Tim is you know, sitting looking at his notes. He's looking at lap times. He's looking at speed traps. He's out there talking to people. He is absolutely on top of everything in that paddock. Because as a driver, he wants to know all of that. He wants to know why that car is 0.3 a lap down, and is it in the old days, is it the weight, or now is it the hybrid, or is it tyres, or is it something more sinister? And he this is the beauty of it. He looks at that from a racer's point of view, and I'm looking at it from an enthusiast's point of view. And between us, I think it works. We get on absolutely fine. We have a lot of fun together, and I think it's been a good double act. When I started, we went to do a sort of dummy run before the season started, and the idea was that we would commentate together on the last race of 2012 just to see how it was going to work. And I did the start of the race, and I got them about as far as Druids, and I let Tim take over, and he got them to Surtees, and I took over. And by the end of the first lap, Simon Parry, who was then the series editor at ITV, said, right, I think we can stop now. That's absolutely fine. And it just worked absolutely straight away. Wow. And it remains, you know, very, very rarely do we have a crossword. And if we do, then it's all sorted out straight away. And I'm normally wrong, so that's fine. And, you know, it works. You know, Tim's like I say, he's a good character. He knows the championship inside out, and we don't always agree on things, but that's, you know, we'll argue it out. Sometimes it can be on air because, you know, it's not to have an opinion. I don't believe. Now, I might have an opinion, and I can suggest my opinion. For example, was that move of driver A legit, Tim, would you say? Meaning, I don't think it was, but I'm not, you know, let's see what you say. Right. But I'm offering you I don't think it's right. What do you think? But I don't believe it's up to me to say that was a bad move, because I'm not a racing driver. But he is. He can call on that. You know, quite early on when we were in 2013, there was one race where I'd posed a question or said something, and Tim looked at me like, "What the hell are you saying that for?" It was something to do with, what the benefits of front wheel drive were, or something like that. And I could see him thinking, "Christ Almighty, what have I got saddled with here?" And I said to him afterwards,
Really?
"I know the answer, but there are lots of people that don't, and I'm asking this for their benefit." I mean, this takes me back to what I said earlier on about Mike Raymond in Australia. Mike Raymond was outstanding, and he was not only Australian touring car racing's main commentator, he was also the exec producer of the coverage. And Mike wanted that broadcast to be the best it could be. So if he didn't look like the smart ass, that didn't matter to Mike. As long as the information was given to the viewer and they'd enjoyed the race and they'd learned something, that was fine. Didn't matter who said it. It wasn't about him showing off. So he was quite happy for other people in the team to do that bit or say this or do this other, whatever it might be. Because ultimately it was for the broadcast. It was for the overall output. And I think occasionally we all are guilty of trying to show off how much we know rather than just letting the viewer enjoy the race.
Just enjoy it all,
yeah. There are lots of people that quite rightly do their homework, but we don't need to know how many 10th places this bloke's had in last year's Honda Civic Cup or whatever it might be. There's a time and a place for that. And when the leaders are side by side, that ain't it.
No, exactly. And there's some things that you kind of know, but you think, well, there's no point mentioning it. And it's when people sort of come up and say, "Oh, you've forgotten this." Well, I haven't. It's just that it's not relevant. It's that kind of.
Yeah. There's a time and a place for it. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
I mean, there's something actually. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, it goes back to what Neville Hay said. You're not here to show people how much you know. You're here to stop them changing channel. And if they're interested and engaged in the race, they'll stay with you. Yeah,
absolutely. Just going back to you and Tim, I mean, there was something that you said actually up on stage at the Autosport show, which I thought summed up what you and Tim do perfectly. And the fans would agree it does. It absolutely works in it. Always has done since you guys started. But something that you said it's my job to describe what's happened, and it's Tim's job to describe why. And I thought that just sums it up perfectly. I mean, with your respective roles, and that's how it works. You say, right, this has happened, and now it's over to the racing driver. It's almost that kind of a thing.
Yeah, because Tim can look at that in a different way. To me, A has passed B, but Tim can say, well, he's later on the brakes, or he's dived up the inside, or he's seldom done it. Whatever it is, he's looking at that through different eyes.
Absolutely, which is a good way. And it goes back to various commentary that I've actually had in the past that have got those different backgrounds and different ways of looking at things. Crikey, we have got some hardcore BTCC fans putting questions in. They're talking about the Cupra. Could the Cupra have been better? I mean, the thing is, they're talking about the Cupra. We've got Team Hard have got it, and some people said they thought it might be race winners, things like that. It takes time to develop a car, especially a new one with the hybrid, everything else. But just a shout out to Bobby Thompson for sticking it on the podium last year, because he was very good in that.
Could the Cupra be better? Quick answer. Some of it comes down to budget. Anything can be better if you've got a bottomless pit of money. Personally, I'm not totally convinced about the shape. I think it's quite a boxy shape. It's a little bit like the Corolla, the Toyota. The better shapes now, the BMW or the Infiniti before it, or the Hyundai, because they're more flowing. I mean, the Avensis was a perfect.
Slippery, aren't they?
Yeah, but the Avensis was an old car, so Speedworks had to go to the Corolla, really, to keep Toyota happy. And it's won races, yes, but I still am slightly hesitant about a boxy shape being as good as a more svelte shape. But that said, I'm not an aero engineer, so what do I know?
Yeah, I would agree with the opinion, but I'm also not an engineer, so I don't know. Like the Subaru Levorg, I mean, that winning the championship just showed how good Ash Sutton was, because it was like a Winnebago going around, wasn't it? It was, and he won the title in it. So
yeah, and don't forget they missed a day at Thruxton. I mean, they didn't do 3 races. I can remember those cars being packed up at Thruxton, and yeah, that was another great season.
Yeah, incredible stuff. Well, I mean, there's so many questions, guys. We can't get to them all. We're going to be here till about 3:30 in the morning. And if I do that, my daughter will let me have an hour's sleep. So we can't really do that. Just very quickly, something that's sort of come up in the last few years is the e-racing, sim racing, which you've done a lot of stuff on. I mean, that's exploded, isn't it? the sim race, and also you've done some work with with the Power Max series and the trucks and all that kind of thing. Does it feel a bit odd commentating on something that's kind of real but not real? Does it feel a bit odd?
It certainly did to begin with when we first did any. The first esports race I did was pretty much as lockdown had just started. So the end of March 2020, SRO did this charity challenge. And I think we had one race, one 1 hour race for the pro drivers, one 1 hour race for the sim drivers. And was it an all-in final for the sort of top 20 out of each from memory. And I said to my wife, do you think I should do this? And she said, oh, God, absolutely. It'll give you something to do and stop you being, there with a sore head. Because none of us knew what to do in lockdown, did we? Especially at the start of it. How long is it going to last? What do we do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, I've got no idea how to commentate on esports, because everything I'd ever seen of it in terms of photographs in magazines or whatnot were of 30 rigs all lined up with people staring at the screen. How the hell am I going to commentate on this? And of course, what I hadn't really understood was that they're all then on one track in one race. So the pictures we got were like any broadcast feed. And the graphics were so good that, after a lap or so, you think, well, actually, I'll just treat this as any other normal race. And another friend of mine who has race GT cars was watching it, and his wife walked in and looked at the television and said, "That's Monza. Why aren't you racing? Why aren't you there?" Completely forgetting it was lockdown and that there was no racing, but the graphics were so good, she instantly thought, "Oh, why isn't he at work?" sort of thing.
Like it's real,
So the SRO stuff I did, and I did, as you say, the European truck racing esports, and I did the Power Max touring cars, and I did some single seaters for the BRDC. The first one of which was absolute hell, because I was told by the people that were running it that I had to have iRacing. Okay, it doesn't work on a Mac, only works on a PC. I don't have a PC, so anyway, friends of mine in the TV world came and delivered a computer, a PC, and 2 monitors for me. This PC powers an outside broadcast truck, so I'm thinking that's spot on. That's just what I need. And we do a few tests, and is it working? And yes, it's all fine. And we go live for this race. So this was the BRDC's esports championship. 40 BRDC members in single seaters for this game, for this race. And as soon as they all get to the grid, all the cars disappear on my screen. All the track's there, and the pit wall is there, and the clouds are there, but no cars. And I think,
oh, here we go.
Bollocks. Never mind. Somebody will know about this, and it'll all come good in a minute. And it didn't. And the basic problem was that the graphics, I mean, I'm not a computer person. The graphics processor or the graphics spongle interbling, whatever it's called, couldn't cope with all the graphics of 40 cars. Why they'd not run me a low latency feed, I don't know. So it ended up with me and Andy Merrick commentating on it. Andy had sort of put this together. Now, he was watching YouTube on a slightly delayed feed. And it ended up with me having to try and describe the race off the timings page and asking him various questions about, what about this battle for the lead? Because I can't see it. And for the whole 25 minutes, I would get the occasional glimpse of a car. And eventually, what I can do here on my iPad is to find the YouTube channel with it on. And although it'll be delayed, at least I can back reference it. So that was hell on a stick.
Right.
After that, when they finally provided a proper feed that was not going to kill computers, that was all fine. But it is fascinating, I agree, to see how it's exploded, like, as you say, and how I think it's now waned a bit because we've gone back to real world racing. So when there was nothing else, of course, it was always going to do well. And for things like SRO's GT Asia Championship that didn't really run for a couple, only came back last year, so it lost an extra year because of the dramas out in that area. It was absolutely essential. Where for the trucks or for SRO, whether it's been British GT or whatever, where you've got real world drivers in their real world equivalents, if you like, with the correct livery and so forth. I find that spot on.
Yeah.
Where I struggle with it a bit is when it's 20 blokes who've come back from the pub and are having a race for fun. And that's not to try and belittle what they're doing. It's just that for me, because I don't know who they are, I don't get what I'm watching in as much. I don't know who's good. I don't know what this means. I don't know what this proves. But I do understand that if there's a race and it's got, I don't know, Jules Gounon in it and Raffaele Marciello in GT cars, whether it's real or virtual, I can appreciate where we're at. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I'm kind of the same. I mean, I was completely tuned out of it. I didn't really watch much of it until I saw there was something that was going to be on TV broadcast, and it had like Mario Andretti and Tom Coronel were driving in it, and I went, "Oh, I'm watching that," just because.
Yeah, but you see, for me, that's less appealing because you're not going to have Mario Andretti and Tom Coronel in a real world race. You know, when F1 were doing things where you might have Max Verstappen and a I don't know, celebrity chef. Well, so what? That's just people having a bit of fun. That's not replicating the real world of racing. Now, it might not be intending to, but where it does replicate the real world, that's where I'm more interested. If that makes sense.
I mean, it was that kind of that switched me on, and then there was a race. I think George Russell was in it, and there was a load of other racers were in it. And as you say, that kind of made it more real. I suppose.
Yeah.
Just something I do want to touch on very quickly on time again. John Cavill is a very, very strong supporter of the page. So thank you, John. He said, "Can I ask you about Brian Kreisky?
Brian Kreisky.
It was former, was it the nephew of a former Chancellor of Austria? I guess you've spent time with him, worked with him.
Right. Thanks, John. There's a under the bus. You can throw me under the bus.
Yeah.
Kreisky was how can I phrase this? He was an acquired taste, and it was a taste that not many people acquired. Brian was an outstanding businessman. He was a ruthless businessman, and he could be a nasty bastard at times, as many people will attest. But he was incredibly hardworking. Brian was one of the real pioneers of motorsport television. He would, in the early 80s, and again, put this in the context of the time, as we said earlier, in the 1980s, there was no satellite TV, there was no cable TV, there was no live stream on the internet. Motorsport on television was what the BBC or ITV gave you. We didn't even have Channel 4 at that stage in the very early 80s. The only other option was to buy, and they were quite expensive in these days, about 25 quid or something, a clunking great VHS video. So Brian, for example, who'd done some stills photography, if memory serves, in the 70s, he was one of the first to get hold of a video camera and go to Le Mans and walk round for 24 hours, filming from that corner, filming from this corner, filming in the pits, and then he'd go home and he'd edit it and he'd voice it and he'd sell videos. And he was in at the beginning. And he grew as more and more people started to want either corporate videos, if you like, of their events. So he got involved with Rothmans for MotoGP or World Motorcycle Racing, as it then was, and Rothmans rallying. Yeah. And he, as I say, he was a ruthless businessman, and a lot of people were on the wrong end of that ruthlessness. The positives, I suppose, were that through Brian, motorsport got more output through things like B-Sky B and Eurosport. And there was a period where Brian had lots of contracts to film things. Sorry, other way around. He had lots of outlets. So he had airtime on Eurosport and B-Sky B, as it then was. And because of his attitude and his nature, not many people wanted to work with him. So he had all of these places to show things and not much to film. I'm going back to the sort of early to mid 90s now. But at the same time, Eurosport had taken over Screen Sport. People of a certain age will remember Screen Sport.
I remember Screen Sport, yeah.
Now, the one of the major...
Purple and green.
That's it, yeah. And one of the major providers for Screen Sport was Hey Fisher, which I've been doing stuff for. And so there was this kind of marriage of convenience that produced the Motorsports Consortium, where Hayfisher were doing all the filming, and then that stuff, because they'd lost their screen sport programs, that would then, I'm simplifying this a bit, I accept, but that would then go into Brian's programs. And so there was this marriage between the two organisations, and that in turn was a success, and it grew, and Motorsports Consortium, as it then became MSC, started to do more things like providing the on-track Grand Prix, big screen coverage, and so on and so forth. And they were then in at the beginning of Power Tour, which was F3 GT and National Saloons, which got onto Channel 4. And then Brian was killed in a plane crash round about Christmas of 2000, from memory. Was it at Blackbush? And I forget whether he didn't have enough altitude to clear a building, but anyway, it was very sad, because there was him and other members of his family on board the plane. He was a very accomplished pilot, and was normally very, very meticulous in his preparations. And whatever happened that night, I don't think I even really got to the bottom of the whole story. But he was killed in this plane crash. I mean,
I do remember that happening, because it was just down the road. Yeah. Blackbush is about 20 miles down the road from here. So.
I mean, he was a bit like Just William in a way. When he was good, he was great company and could be entertaining, and he could be charming. But when he was bad, he was horrid, like Just William. But yeah, I mean, he probably did. I can't say he was my favourite person, but I am trying to be positive about it. And I think the biggest positive was he probably did, like Richard and Neville Hay, a huge amount to give motorsport fans more motorsport on TV than they would have had, without him in existence, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I have to thank him for that, of course. John Cabell's just said that he found Brian, that he was very good company when you spoke to him one-to-one, but in company he could be difficult.
Yeah, I'll go along with that. Yeah,
that probably sums it up. I mean, we've been here for almost 2 hours. You just got to get to a few questions that have come in and things like that. Again, we're back to the BTCC. Someone asked, that's a good question. Very simple question. What's your favourite BTCC livery ever? That's a great one, because I've got two, but I'm going to...
Ever, or in the time I've been doing it?
Or should we do both? Let's do both. Why not?
I think from the time I've been doing it, I liked the Pertec Ford.
Yeah,
that Andrew Jordan had.
Pertec was a good one, wasn't
that
it?
just worked on that car. That colour scheme worked really nicely. Favourite ever? Not sure it was that. God, that's a tough one. You see, one of the it's tempting to go the route of the Eggenberger Texaco Sierras, but because that wasn't a full-time British touring car campaign, it was a sort of half season. I don't really count that. I was thinking that more as a European or a world touring car.
Yeah.
What I always did like, actually, was the Brooklyn stripy Ford Escorts that Chris Hodgetts and Paul Taft and John Morris had. Do you remember the white with the blue and the grey stripes? And there's a guy called Steve Yates that works as a tyre mechanic for some of the touring car teams, and he's a great Ford fan, and he's built a data post recreation Escort and a Brooklyn recreation, and he races it with a classic touring car racing club, and it's absolutely spot on. It's a great recreation, great replica. So that goes on my list, certainly, the Brooklyn Escorts. And I always have a soft spot for the Napolina Alfa GTV6, just because of the shape of the car and the noise it made, and the fact that that was my introduction to tin tomatoes, really, on the side of an Alfa in touring car racing.
Brilliant. I'm just going to throw because Andrew Bishop has just said one of my sort of two, the Andy Rouse caliber RS 500. That was the year that I mean, again, it's just because it was the year that I got into it, 88. But my other one was the Jerry Marley.
Not proper beer. You see, caliber. No, you can't have that because it's
alcohol. Yeah. See, we're going to come on to beer in just a second, but yeah, do
you know the Klaus Thaler Toyota Corolla that Tony Crudgington had in 86, 87? See, that was alcohol free.
Yes. Yeah. No need for it, is there? No. One that I'm going to throw into the mix: Jerry Marney, the Arquati RS 500, first BTCC race I ever watched. So that would be my one. Okay. And I've got to say Rob Gravitt, the red and white, the cartel one. I love that as well. But anyway, we could go on for years with this one. I digress. Okay. Well, we're on the subject of beer. Someone did say, what are your favourite beers? Because you love your beer. You're a bit of a connoisseur of beers. A few people have asked.
Okay. Well,
3.
the starting point is they've got to be Belgian. Okay.
Yes, Belgian beers. Yes.
So Belgium is the winning nation, and Germany is a close second. And it depends on the mood, really. This is dwindling, but that's Lef, which is good cooking lager, cooking beer, cooking ale. But if you want a nice blonde beer, nice refreshing quaffable one, Duvel.
Okay.
If you're after something, because I quite like IPA beers, so Houblon Chouffe is a very nice IPA. If you want something that's good to sip over the course of the evening, you want a Chimay. A Chimay red is one of the dark ones, or a Chimay blue. They're quite dark, but of course all Belgian beers are quite strong in terms of the alcohol percentage, so you don't need many of these to wipe yourself out. And one that I discovered a few years ago at Spa is Triple Carmelite, which is it's quite strong. I want to say it's about 9% from memory, but it's got to my palate, it's got a slightly creamy taste to it.
Ooh,
and I think it's really nice. I have been drinking quite a lot of that. In fact, at Spa in what year would we be? 2020. I was staying at the Radisson. It was the period where we had British GT one week and the 24 hours the next. And I'd got there on the Friday and checked in, and I thought, right, I was waiting for somebody to come and join me who was driving across a bit later. So I settled myself outside with a Triple Carmelite and with Motorsport News, and there I was, quite happy with my beer and my paper. And Dennis Lind and Sandy Mitchell arrived, and we got chatting. And Dennis said, "Do you mind if we join you?" I said, "No, it's fine. Come on." So we sat down, and he ordered a round of Triple Carmelite. And I think I think we had 3 or maybe 4. I was one up on them, of course, because I'd started earlier. Anyway, Dennis put it on pole position the following day. So clearly it is the beer of GT champions, because he also won the championship that year. But I do maintain that irrespective of him being on pole position, I really should have been on pole because I'd had an extra beer. So by right, yeah.
Well, we've got Michael Crease, who came on earlier. He's in the GT this year. Maybe we'll have to have a couple of pints of that before the
yeah, but I mean, he's from Essex or somewhere, isn't he? I mean, it'll be Foster's or some watery Natswee that he'll drink. I mean, it won't count. He might as well just drink fizzy water. And whatever Crease he drinks, it'll have an umbrella in the top of it, so doesn't count.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a Guinness man. I've always liked Guinness and that kind of a thing. So proper stuff. I've always said if you can see through a pint, you're drinking the wrong stuff. Put your fingers behind it and see what happens. Yeah, Carling, yes, not good. Right. So there you go. That's the beer hit list. Okay, very quickly. Okay, one more question we've got here. 2-parter. Your favourite circuit to visit as in a professional capacity and as a fan. Do you have a favourite circuit? Spa.
Well, Spa ticks most of the boxes because it takes you back to the earlier question. I like Belgian beer, so it's a good place to be. It's a great circuit because it's a challenge for the drivers. Even now, it doesn't matter how people moan about it being sanitized compared to early days, it's still a challenge.
I think a sanitized Spa is still harder than most places out there, isn't it?
Exactly. And for the 24 hours, that's really one of my perfect weekends. It's GT cars, it's a long race, it's a great circuit, and there's fantastic beer to bring home. So the other favorite circuit, I suppose, would be Bathurst, because I always loved going there. I did the 2 24-hour races there, 02 and 03, and then went back to do the V8s, as we talked about before. And Silverstone, because I feel very parochial, that's the wrong word, but I've been going to Silverstone for so long, and I've worked there every year since I started, and becoming the commentator for the Grand Prix and being a member of the BRDC and whatnot. Silverstone is on that list of favourite circuits. I know people complain about it, and I know it's flat, and I know it's lots of things. It's not Brands Hatch. It can't be because of the nature of it, these days it is very much geared towards the Grand Prix first and foremost, but that is increasingly now absolutely vital to Silverstone, because in the current era with Drive to Survive, with the popularity of the sport, popularity of British drivers, they cannot get enough people into Silverstone really now for the Grand Prix.
Yeah.
And that's a situation. And finally, the circuit can make some money because of Liberty's attitude rather than Bernie Ecclestone's attitude.
Yes.
Finally, the Grand Prix is becoming worth Silverstone's huge effort, and they're getting something back out of it, even more importantly.
Yeah, absolutely.
You might go to a club race at Silverstone and hate the place, but if you go on Grand Prix day when it's dressed and it's got an atmosphere and it's absolutely packed, it's a superb place.
Because I was there in 2021, I was at Stowe, and it was just unreal. I mean, as you say, Silverstone gets a bad press from the fans, and I don't understand why. Because you get a grandstand, you get a nice seat, you don't get wet. Obviously, we like being knee deep at mud, and Knockhill and Brands and stuff. Of course, you do. But Silverstone, as you say, it's that corporate side of things, and it's just the history of it. It's the home. It's where it all began. So. But yeah, you've definitely sold Spa, the 24 hours of Spa. You've sold me that.
I'll tell you, it is a fabulous week. If people haven't been, from Wednesday afternoon onwards, there's always something happening. Wednesday afternoon, the cars do a lap round the circuit, queue up at the end of the pit straight where La Source hairpin is, and then drive into town. So on the public roads, the roads are closed, and the cars go into town.
So they go out of the corner where the cottage is, and
go straight on, and then into town. There's a sort of pace car thing, which is largely TV doing tracking shots, and they drive into town and they park, and there are autograph signings, and the drivers go to the drivers' briefing, and then they drive home again or drive back into the circuit. And then from Thursday morning, from about 9 o'clock, track action is relentless because Spa's expensive to hire and lots of people want to race there. So there's a lot of support races, plus practice, plus qualifying for the 24 hours itself. If you go back a few years to Le Mans, where very little happened on some days, Spa's completely different. It is relentless, really, from Thursday morning onwards in terms of actual competing cars on the track virtually all the time.
That sounds like a weekend that's just made the bucket list.
We need to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. Right, I think there's so many more things we could talk. I mean, someone's mentioned the livery, the Primera 98, 99, all the Cooper's ETCR stuff. Goodness me, lots of comments, but we're gonna have to wrap it up. I mean, we've been over 2 hours and it's flown by. It's these things always do. But we're gonna have to wrap it up there, folks. But David, thank you so much for coming on, having a chat. And again, thank you for not running a mile when I collared you at Autosport. I still haven't managed to pin Tim down. I said I was going to speak to him and he agreed, but I've not heard from him since. So we'll have to have a word with Tim.
I'll twist his arm.
Please do. But no, thank you very much indeed for coming. Oh, someone just said we need a part 2. Crikey, we'll see. We've got plenty coming up. We'll see.
Happy to do it if you want, if there's a demand.
Yeah, fantastic. No, it's been great speaking with you, and thank you for talking us through motorsport from a different perspective, which is nice because we normally have the drivers on, so it's nice to hear it from your side. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Okay, right, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in. And I said we're back on Tuesday, but if you're going to BTCC Media Day, I'll be there. So if you see me, come and say hi. Thanks very much, guys, and good night, and enjoy the rest of your week.